Welcome to ACD-Combatives, your combatives and control tactics channel. Please like, subscribe, and share. Guys, Coach Kurt. So you know ACD-Combatives, my channel is pretty much dedicated to control tactics, police combatives, but it's absolutely a martial arts channel as well. So if we're looking for a martial art that combines the best of the two worlds, it's Taiho Jutsu. Literally translates to arresting techniques or arresting art. And it goes all the way back to feudal Japan. And they had designated samurai that would be in charge or responsible for detaining, arresting, and apprehending. But that's all good and dandy. And a lot of the techniques from Taiho Jutsu come from Jujitsu, Kenjutsu, Aiki Jujitsu, all these classic systems. But modern Taiho Jutsu, as we know it, pretty much comes from just post-World War II. Just after the war, Taiho Jutsu was developed for the police force, Japanese police force, in how to arrest people without having to kill them. A lot of the old classic techniques the samurai used could be pretty aggressive. Even if the person lived, the samurai techniques were absolutely just devastating in general, not necessarily least amount of force or minimal force. In today's world, in today's control tactics, it would be Graham v. Connor, the case law for the Supreme Court. What is objectively reasonable? Not minimal force, not maximum force, reasonable force. But I get off track. So if you want to know more about Taiho Jutsu, I recommend you go to the United States Jiu-Jitsu Federation, look them up, and they have a Taiho Jutsu program. You can go to that page. They also have a shop, and they sell a couple books, one about basically the extensive history of Taiho Jutsu, and then they have a first dan program book, Taiho Jutsu. That's pretty much the curriculum I adhere to when I look at classical, traditional Taiho Jutsu as a system. And there's plenty of good systems out there. Taiho Jutsu is kind of a generic term, so it's not like there's only one system of Taiho Jutsu, just like there's several systems of karate. You get the idea. But I know in UK they have a pretty good following and program. But as I like to look at it, and the system I adhere to is United States Taiho Jutsu. Now, my channel, you see me practicing a lot of what I would consider modern Taiho Jutsu, or a derivative or a subsection of traditional Taiho Jutsu, modified to meet current case law and needs. Because there are certain techniques, even in traditional Taiho Jutsu, like vascular restraints, chokes, where you may or may not be able to use them in police today. Like my agency, for example, you're only allowed to use a vascular restraint or choke if you feel like your life is in danger or you're in danger of severe, grievous bodily injury and harm. You get the idea. Even though anyone who practices jujitsu, judo, any of the grappling arts that know that you can do a vascular restraint excessively safe on somebody. And it's not going to, as a matter of fact, it's probably less dangerous than a taser. But that's neither here nor there. This is how the current law looks at it. But this video is basically a good example of, where the traditional Taiho Jutsu meets modern concepts of control tactics and modern Taiho Jutsu. What I practice for actual real-world encounters isn't that much different from traditional systems. You'll see that when I cut back and forth between some of the classic training. It's in kata. A lot of it looks very kata-ish or kata form, and grappling arts use kata too, just not what you would expect from like the striking arts where you're solo moving in the air, you're punching and kicking in the air. Grappling arts or Taiho Jutsu or Jiu-Jitsu or Judo, they have like classic Kodokan Judo has kata. It's two-man practice, two-person practice. And yes, it's a cooperative drilling. And from my last video, I told you that cooperative drilling is extremely important. And all good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools do drilling. We drill a lot in my school. The entire class is a variation of techniques, and then you drill them. And then the last 15 minutes of class, maybe or less, it's free mat time where you can roll, and you're allowed to stay after class until for a good half hour past class to keep rolling if you want with people who want to roll with you. So it's very that's the kind of balance we're looking for. But classic Taiho Jutsu or traditional Taiho Jutsu, a lot of drilling, and some of the techniques you wouldn't necessarily use them that way in real life. It does not mean that it's not important to practice them. For example, a static wrist grab. Generally speaking, nobody's going to attack you that way. It does happen. I've had people grasp onto me, usually my outer vest, or they grab my arm, and you have to restrain them or at least get their hand off of you. For a good example for a civilian is your drunk Uncle Joe at the family barbecues being a dick, and you need to control him, and you don't want to kenpo him with 1,000 strikes and rip his jugular out. You want to control him, kind of like what I'm doing on screen here. This is gift wrap into a straitjacket position. You can talk to the individual. More grabbing examples of how to blend with somebody, melting with the grab, cooperating with the energy. You get the idea. Taiho Jutsu borrows all these techniques from various systems of jiu-jitsu, but especially Goshin jiu-jitsu or Goshin jitsu, which is basically self-defense, Japanese jiu-jitsu system, more modern as it's practiced for self-defense. Taiho Jutsu would be even more streamlined specifically for arresting techniques or the arresting arts. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. But it's extremely important to not stump the classic traditional training methods and techniques. There is value in those techniques. You remember these techniques came from the samurai warriors of the past who killed way more people than you and I ever could. And how they would practice those techniques. A good example is judo is a good way of making jiu-jitsu safe. Classic Kodokan Judo was designed to keep the training relatively safe, because traditional jiu-jitsu from the past, I mean, people got hurt easy in training, because a lot of those techniques were designed for killing. The samurai would off-balance you, take you down, and then finish the technique on the ground with a sword or a knife, or a breaking technique or a choking technique. Here we see a good example of a modern police officer using grappling techniques. She used good example of taking his balance, kazushi, and here's an example of how it would be done in competition, taking the balance with kazushi and unbalancing and taking the person down. The female officer, she does what I consider a snap down. The guy's bigger and stronger than her. She's using classic grip fighting, and there she's doing a distraction with her right leg to make him think he's trying to sweep. The whole point is to get him to step a specific direction so she can off balance in this direction. Now, in this case, I call this the hockey jersey technique, where she ended up actually pulling the jersey over his head. And here's more drilling variations of that, where you're grappling with somebody, standing, grappling, and then you see an opening. In this case, I saw a ankle pick, and I took it, and we went for the ground position. And if I remember right in this session, then we would reset. We weren't going for the finish, and then the other person would take a try. Here's a great example of you're doing the pummeling type drilling. And there's some punching and stuff in it, but we're concentrating mostly on the pummel and the grapple. And so there's a knee and he knees. So example of a safe way to practice pummeling with strikes, your MMA style. And there I keep him off with him a kick, and then we re-engage. This is positionally pummeling. Now, I overcommit here, and he does a beautiful shoulder throw on me. This is my MMA and Krav Maga coach, Colton. Unfortunately, he's at where I used to live, and I don't get to train with him anymore. And here's an example of a more classic approach to traditional Taiho Jutsu. As you can see, it's still very practical. They're practicing these techniques, drilling them, going for perfection. That's a huge difference between traditional martial arts, and in this case, traditional Taiho Jutsu. He's even practicing handcuffing. This is a beautiful example of Taiho Jutsu. Very well done. Yeah, doing a good search, pat down, incident to arrest, getting the person back up on their feet. This is a beautiful example. The problem with modern control tactics is they try to water it down to the point where, well, I need to be able to train this person in 8 to 10 hours a year. My agency's 8 hours a year. I have to train these people. And that's control tactics, baton, pepper spray, taser. It's ridiculous. It's just not enough. But anyway, I think you get the point. I wanted to just introduce you to the concept of traditional Taiho Jutsu and how it progressed to classical or a modern Taiho Jutsu or modern control tactics. Everybody take care, stay safe.
Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out.